Imagine a totally well-meaning educator, right? Just sitting at their laptop on a Tuesday evening.
Just trying to get their week sorted out.
Exactly. They just want to organize their classroom better, so they navigate to a web page and sign up for a free public software account.
Right, super standard stuff.
Yeah, it takes them maybe 2 minutes of typing, zero cost, zero friction. But because of a silent, invisible flaw in how the internet is currently plumbed, that simple Tuesday night click essentially acts as a skeleton key.
And not just a small one.
No, a massive one. A skeleton key that exposes 275 million private records across, I think the number is 8,809 institutions in over 50 countries.
It's the kind of disaster our brains just aren't wired to process, honestly.
No, because there's no physical rubble.
Right. No alarm bells going off in a building somewhere. Just a cascading, totally silent collapse of the digital infrastructure we implicitly trust with our most sensitive information.
And that is exactly what we are dissecting today. Welcome to this deep dive into the unprecedented 18-month collapse of the EdTech supply chain.
That's a heavy one today.
It really is. We are diving into a massive stack of sources today. We've got urgent incident reports from Mandiant and CrowdStrike, cybersecurity postmortems, and some, frankly, incredibly dense FTC compliance matrices.
Yeah, those matrices are not light reading.
Not at all. But our mission is to synthesize all of this so you can understand the underlying mechanics of the staggering May 2026 Canvas breach. And then we're going to connect it to the catastrophic December 2024 PowerSchool breach.
Because you really can't understand one without the other.
Exactly. And crucially, we are going to lay out the immediate, actionable steps you must take this week to protect your family's identity.
Because, look, waiting for an official letter in the mail from your school district, that is no longer a viable security strategy.
Not anymore.
By the time that letter actually arrives at your house, the damage is already compounding.
Absolutely. Now, before we jump into the deep end of the server logs, I want to enthusiastically thank the first sponsor of today's exploration, which is www.breached.company.
They do fantastic work.
They really do. As I was going through the stack of source material, their granular, step-by-step supply chain analysis formed the absolute backbone of our technical timeline today.
Yeah, their reconstruction of the architectural failures in the EdTech space is unparalleled.
It really helps demystify all the technical jargon, you know.
Yeah.
If you want to see the real-time telemetry of how these events actually unfolded, that is the site you need to bookmark.
Highly recommend it.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Before we can truly understand the threat to your personal data, we have to look at the plumbing. We have to look at the actual mechanisms.
Right, how the pipes connect.
Exactly. I'm looking at the timeline from the incident reports, and it's April 30th to May 7th, 2026. A threat actor syndicate known as ShinyHunters claims to have exfiltrated 3.65 terabytes of data.
Which is an unimaginably large amount of text data, by the way.
It's staggering, and the blast radius is just wild. We're talking about 41% of North American higher education.
Almost half.
Yeah. All 8 Ivy League schools. Massive public K-12 districts like Los Angeles Unified, Chicago Public Schools, Miami-Dade. So the question is, how does a free account created by a single teacher give a hacker access to Harvard's database?
Right. Well, to understand that, we really have to understand a concept called multi-tenant SOS, or software as a service.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So if we rewind to, say, the early 2000s, a university like Harvard would buy a piece of software on a literal physical disk.
Like a CD-ROM.
Exactly. They'd install it on a server rack sitting in a heavily air-conditioned basement right on their campus and run it locally. If someone wanted to hack Harvard's learning management system back then, they literally had to target Harvard's specific basement server.
Right, the data was physically isolated, like an island.
Yeah, exactly, an island. But islands are, well, they're really expensive to maintain. You have to hire local IT staff, manage all the hardware upgrades, patch the software manually every time there's an update.
It's a huge logistical headache.
Huge. So to achieve massive global scale and, drastically lower costs, the entire educational technology industry shifted to the cloud.
Which makes sense on paper.
It does. But multi-tenant SaaS means that thousands of different schools are no longer on their own islands. They are essentially renting space inside the exact same giant shared database hosted by a vendor.
And in this case, the vendor is Instructure, the company that makes the Canvas platform.
Right.
Okay, let me make sure I'm picturing this right. Let's try an analogy. Is it like a bank building a state-of-the-art impenetrable titanium vault for its billionaire enterprise clients?
I like where this is going.
So they have the laser grids, the biometric scanners, armed guards. But then, to be friendly to the local community, the bank lets anyone walk into the lobby to use a free checking account.
Zero friction.
Right. No background checks, no IDs. And what the bank didn't realize is that the lobby's public bathroom shares a ventilation shaft directly with the main titanium vault.
That is actually a phenomenal way to visualize it, because the bank, which is in structure in this scenario, is relying on what we call logical isolation controls.
Logical isolation, meaning it's just code.
Yes, just code. Since Harvard and the free tier teacher are technically sitting in the same physical database, the software code is supposed to act as an invisible wall.
So it's not a physical server rack separating them anymore.
No, not at all. The code basically says tenant A can only see tenant A's rows of data, and tenant B can only see tenant B's rows.
But those invisible walls rely entirely on the system knowing exactly who is who, right?
Precisely. That's the whole ballgame. Logical isolation is completely dependent on robust identity verification. You have to authenticate the user to know which invisible walls to enforce in the first place.
Got it.
And this is where the ventilation shaft in your bank analogy really comes into play. The fatal flaw was that Instructure's free-for-teacher program, the FFT tier, shared the exact same production back-end infrastructure as the paid enterprise tier.
Oh, wow. So they were fundamentally in the same pool.
Yes, but because the FFT tier was specifically designed for rapid, frictionless user growth, to get teachers to just sign up quickly.
Right. They don't want a 10-step verification process for a free account.
Exactly. So it had materially weaker identity verification.
So you literally have a highly secure vault sharing a roof with a completely unverified lobby.
Right. And if you look at the incident reports in our sources, they confirm that the attackers didn't use some sophisticated nation-state missile to blow up the vault door. They didn't have to.
What did they do?
They exploited a vulnerability involving support ticketing within that free-for-teacher environment.
Hold on, I want to stop you there, because the reports mention that they use this support ticket flaw as a, quote, lateral movement vector.
Right, cybersecurity jargon.
Yeah, it sounds like a very fancy way of saying they picked a log from the inside. But how does an IT support ticket actually let someone cross those invisible digital lane dividers? Like, are they tricking the system into thinking they're a super admin?
You're getting warmer, but let's take it a step further into the actual mechanism of it.
Yeah.
Imagine you submit a help desk ticket saying, hey, I can't access my course.
Pretty standard request.
Super standard. The automated ticketing system needs to pull up your profile to help the human IT agent on the other end. To do that, the system uses an API.
An application programming interface.
Exactly. An API fetches your data. The attackers realized that if they manipulated a specific web address, the actual URL of that API call, the system's logical isolation checks would just get confused.
Wait, really? Just by changing the web address? So they basically changed the name on the file folder they were requesting?
Essentially, yes. Because the free tier and the enterprise tier were swimming in the exact same database, the attacker, who was logged in as a completely free user, manipulated the API to say, hey, show me the support profile for user ID 500.
Instead of their own user ID.
Right. And because the internal API implicitly trusted the request, since it was coming from inside the house, inside that shared environment, it totally bypassed the strict identity checks that an outside intruder would normally face.
The invisible wall just evaporated.
It evaporated. And from there, they could laterally move into the production course data of thousands of paid, verified enterprise institutions.
It's just wild to think about. A manipulated URL string brings down the Ivy League.
It's terrifyingly simple when you break it down.
It really exposes a massive blind spot in the entire EdTech sector's business model, doesn't it? I mean, for the last decade, we've seen this massive push to consolidate vendors.
Oh, absolutely.
School boards want cheaper, easier procurement. They don't want to manage 50 different specialized software programs for 50 different things. They want one massive learning management system to rule them all.
And to be fair, consolidation makes tremendous operational and financial sense on a spreadsheet.
Sure, you cut down on vendor bloat.
You do. But from a cybersecurity standpoint, it creates colossal, systemic, single points of failure. When the strategy for the entire educational sector becomes one vendor for everyone, the inevitable reality becomes one breach hits everyone.
Yeah, you aren't just sharing a software platform anymore. You are actively choosing to share a threat model with 8,000 other institutions.
Exactly.
If the vendor makes one single mistake on a free tiers API, Harvard, a Miami-Dade, and a local elementary school in Ohio all pay the price simultaneously.
And the price they are paying is measured in data, which really brings us to the actual contents of that 3.65 terabytes, because not all data is created equal.
Right. That's a huge point. Because if the Canvas breach was just about names and school email addresses, it would be bad, sure. But we've all received those. Your data has been involved in a breach letters.
Right, the credit monitoring offers.
Exactly. It's almost background noise at this point. But to understand why this specific incident is causing cybersecurity analysts to lose sleep, we have to look back just 18 months. We have to connect it to the massive PowerSchool breach from December 2024.
You absolutely cannot look at these two events in isolation.
They're linked.
Together, they represent the complete, absolute collapse of the EdTech supply chain.
Okay, let's do a quick recap of the PowerSchool breach for context, just so we have the whole picture. This was December 2024. It exposed 72 million records.
And 62 million of those were minor students.
Just awful. And PowerSchool holds something like 75% of the North American K-12 student information systems market.
They are a behemoth.
They really are. And the weak point there wasn't a clever API flaw in a free account. It was a customer support portal called PowerSource.
A portal that, and this is still astonishing to me, did not have multi-factor authentication or MFA enabled.
It's mind-boggling. I mean, it's a system holding the granular data of millions of children, and it was breached by a 19-year-old solo operator named Matthew Lane.
Not exactly an elite hacking syndicate.
No, he literally just bought stolen contractor credentials off the dark web, typed in a username and password, and walked right in.
No secondary text message, no authenticator app required.
None of it.
And what he exfiltrated over the course of 9 days was an absolute goldmine of what we call structured identity data.
Okay, let's ground that term for a second. Structured identity data. What does that actually look like in a spreadsheet?
So we are talking about highly organized, easily sortable database columns. Names, dates of birth, home addresses, and social security numbers.
Right, and the SSNs affected about 25% of the PowerSchool victims, according to the sources.
Yes. But because it's a student information system specifically, it also included things like special education statuses, individualized education programs, or IEPs, legal custody arrangements, restraining orders against non-custodial parents, and really severe medical alerts.
So it's literally the absolute foundation of a child's legal, civic, and medical identity.
Precisely.
And you said earlier that this is incredibly lucrative for long-term fraud. Let's dive into the mechanism of that, because I think a lot of people don't understand it. How does a hacker actually monetize a 10-year-old's social security number?
It's through a process called synthetic identity fraud. And it relies entirely on the fact that children have what we call blank credit files.
Blank files, meaning no history.
Right. If a fraudster steals an adult SSN and tries to open a credit card, the bank runs a check, sees the adult's existing credit history, and might flag a sudden suspicious new address or a bizarre spending pattern.
Right, the algorithm catches it.
Usually, yes,
Yeah.
but a child has no history at all. They are a totally blank slate.
So the fraudster becomes the author of that slate.
Exactly. The criminal takes the real child's valid social security number, but they pair it with a completely fake name, a fake date of birth, and an address that is controlled by the fraudster.
Okay.
Then, they apply for a really small, unsecured credit card. Often, the first bank just rejects it outright, but simply by applying, they actually force the credit bureau to automatically create a brand new credit file associated with that SSN.
Oh, wow. So the rejection actually serves a purpose. It spawns the file into existence.
Yes, that's the trick. Now, the synthetic identity officially exists in the system, and the fraudster spends months, sometimes years, slowly building up this fake person's credit score.
Like farming.
Very much like farming. They get small loans, they pay them back, they get authorized user status on other fraudulent cards. Eventually, this completely fabricated persona has a stellar credit score of like 750.
And then what?
And that's when they execute what's called the bust out. They take out massive auto loans, huge personal loans, max out high-limit credit cards, and completely vanish.
Leaving the real child holding the bag.
Leaving the 10-year-old with a ruined credit history that will remain entirely undetected until they turn 18.
And try to apply for their first student loan or sign a lease for an apartment?
Exactly. Untangling a synthetic identity nightmare takes years of agonizing legal affidavits and police reports.
That is horrific. So that is structured data. That is the PowerSchool legacy. Now let's contrast that with what was actually stolen in the Canvas breach in May 2026.
A very different data set.
Right, because the incident reports from Instructure confirmed that passwords, social security numbers, and financial data were not taken in the Canvas breach.
Correct.
What they lost was names, institutional emails, student IDs, and this is the piece that honestly made my stomach drop, the actual full-text content of private messages exchanged within the Canvas platform.
Yeah, this is what we call unstructured behavioral context.
Yeah.
It is narrative data. It's the messy human side of education.
See, here's where it gets really interesting and honestly profoundly terrifying. There is this conventional wisdom that a bad data breach is purely financial.
Right, like stealing a credit card.
Exactly. Someone steals your blank check. And yes, stealing an SSM, like PowerSchool, is stealing a blank check. We just established it takes years to fix. But stealing the private messages out of a university's Canvas system, that is like stealing a student's private diary.
That distinction is vital. The psychological weight of narrative data is entirely different from the financial weight of structured data.
Right. I was reading through some of the hypothetical risk profiles in the source stack, and you realize very quickly what actually happens in Canvas messages.
It's not just scheduling.
No, it's not just, hey, professor, what chapters are on the midterm? It's a college sophomore emailing their academic advisor at 2 a.m. to disclose a severe mental health crisis or even suicidal ideation just so they can get an emergency extension on a paper. It's a student submitting a formal request for a medical accommodation, detailing a chronic illness or a learning disability. It's Title IX adjacent reports, right? Students messaging a counselor about being harassed by a classmate.
And it happens in K-12 too.
Exactly. It's K-12 parents messaging a second-grade teacher about a child's sudden behavioral shifts due to a really messy divorce at home. If your social security number is stolen, you can freeze your credit.
Right.
It's a massive headache, obviously, but there is a mechanical lever you can pull to stop the bleeding. But you cannot undisclose a mental health crisis. You cannot rotate a medical diagnosis like you rotate an old password.
And you have just articulated the absolute core of why the intelligence community is flashing red over the combination of these two events.
It's the combo.
It is.
Yeah.
If we look at the entire landscape of compromised EdTech data from 2024 to 2026, the global criminal underground now possesses two halves of a complete, devastatingly synergistic attack toolkit.
They have the structured and the unstructured, the spreadsheet and the diary.
Exactly. From PowerSchool, they have the structured skeleton, the SSNs, the real home addresses, the custodial legal statuses. From Canvas, they have the unstructured flesh and blood, the behavioral context, the private fears, the medical struggles, the academic failures.
And when you put those together,
When an attacker possesses this behavioral context, they can craft spear phishing and extortion campaigns that bypass every single psychological defense mechanism we naturally have.
because it uses our own lived reality against us.
Yes. An attacker doesn't need to send you a generic, poorly spelled email claiming you won a foreign lottery anymore. They can send an email that references the exact conversation you had with your chemistry professor last Tuesday about your failing grade.
It looks authentic because it actually is built on authentic stolen context.
Right, it is weaponized intimacy.
Wow, weaponized intimacy. And before we move on to the actual groups who are wielding this weaponized data, I really want to take a moment to thank our second sponsor, www.compliancehub.wiki.
They're lifesavers for this kind of stuff.
Truly. As we dive into the legal and regulatory nightmare of all this in a few minutes, I need to point out that their vital compliance matrices have been our guiding light for this script. They translate incredibly dense regulatory text into plain English.
Which is no small feat.
No, it's not. If you are a school administrator, a district IT director, or institutional legal counsel listening to this right now, you need to have compliancehub.wiki bookmarked immediately.
I consult their GDPR and COPA cross-reference charts constantly. They are an indispensable resource for understanding the legal quicksand these institutions are currently standing in.
Okay, so we understand the mechanism of the breach. We understand the sheer devastation of the data combo. Now we have to look at the adversaries who are pulling this off.
The human element.
Right, who is actually doing this? And this leads to a question I see constantly in comment sections, and I hear it from frustrated parents at school board meetings all the time. Why can't we just pay them to go away?
The ransom question.
Yeah. If the data is this sensitive, why not just cut a check and bury it?
To answer both the who and the why paying fails, we have to contrast the two threat actors involved in our anchor breaches, because their differences highlight the rapid evolution of cybercrime in real time. Let's start with the PowerSchool breach in 2024.
Right, Matthew Lane.
Matthew Lane was 19 years old. He was a textbook script kiddie, a totally solo operator. He wasn't running some sophisticated multinational syndicate. He simply found compromised contractor credentials on a dark web forum, logged into a portal that absurdly lacked MFA, and spent 9 days writing simple scripts to exfiltrate database rows.
Just a kid with too much access.
Pretty much. He then demanded a $2.9 million ransom. He was eventually caught by the FBI, and in October 2025, he was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison.
So a lone wolf. A teenager who essentially stumbled into the biggest vault in the world because the back door was literally left wide open on a hot summer day.
Right.
Now let's contrast that with the Canvas breach. The group claiming responsibility for that is ShinyHunters.
Yeah, ShinyHunters operates in a completely different stratosphere. Threat intelligence agencies actually track them under designations like Shadow Ether 015.
Sounds like a Bond villain.
It kind of is. They emerged around 2020 and have rapidly evolved from simple data brokers into a highly organized, decentralized syndicate that specializes in extortion as a service.
Extortion as a service, basically a franchise model for cybercrime.
Exactly. They provide the infrastructure, the negotiation portals, and the leak sites and affiliates bring them the access. They are the group behind the massive Ticketmaster breach in 2024 that compromised 560 million records.
Wow.
They don't just stumble into open doors, they execute a very specific, highly strategic playbook.
Yeah, I read through the Mandiant profile on their tactics in our source stack, and it really highlights how totally outgunned some of these software vendors are. Let's walk through that playbook.
Sure. Step 1. ShinyHunters explicitly targets the data supply chain. They realize that hacking one university is wildly inefficient. Why spend weeks trying to breach Oxford's perimeter when you can breach the SaaS platform that Oxford, Cambridge, and 10,000 other schools all sit on?
It's maximum leverage for minimum effort.
Exactly. Step 2. They aggressively hunt for weak trust boundaries. They look for the subprocessors, the third-party integrations, or, as we saw with the Canvas API flaw, the free account tiers that share infrastructure with the enterprise core.
But they aren't just writing brilliant code, right? They are psychological manipulators. The source material details their heavy use of social engineering.
Yes, specifically a highly effective tactic called vishing, or voice phishing. We tend to think of hackers as hooded figures typing furiously in green code in a dark room, but ShinyHunters will literally just pick up the telephone.
Let's do an ELI 5 on vishing for the audience. How does a phone call compromise a secure enterprise network?
It works by exploiting human helpfulness and authority biases. An operative will research a target company heavily on LinkedIn. They find out who the IT help desk managers are and who the new junior employees are.
Right, the vulnerable ones.
Exactly. Then they spoof their phone number to look like an internal corporate extension. They call the junior employee and say something like, "Hey, this is Dave from IT support. We're seeing a critical error on your VPN connection that's threatening to lock your account out before the long weekend. I just sent a push notification to your Authenticator app. Can you approve it real quick so I can fix the sync?"
And the stressed employee just wanting to go home and not get in trouble hits approve on their phone.
Exactly. They bypass multi-factor authentication simply by asking the victim to bypass it for them. This isn't theoretical, by the way. This is exactly what ShinyHunters did to the Ivy League in late 2025.
Right. The Harvard Alumni Affairs breach.
Precisely. In November 2025, they used vishing to breach Harvard University's alumni affairs and development systems. They gained access to the donor database just by deceiving a Harvard employee over the phone.
It's so brazen.
Around the same time, they hit the University of Pennsylvania, exfiltrating 1.2 million records from Penn's Salesforce and SharePoint systems using a compromised employee account. They also hit Columbia and Princeton.
So they are organized, they clearly understand corporate psychology, and they are incredibly ruthless when it comes to leverage. The reports note that once they have the data, they deploy aggressive pay or leak public extortion tactics.
Oh, yeah.
They issue public countdown clocks, and if the victim ignores them or tries to stall, they escalate the pain. I mean, during the Canvas breach, ShinyHunters actually replaced the public Canvas login pages globally with a defacement message.
Yes, I remember seeing screenshots of that.
They taunted Instructure, telling the entire world, every student trying to log in to take their finals, that Instructure was ignoring their demands.
It's public humiliation designed as a pressure cooker for negotiation.
Which brings me back to my pointed question. And I'm going to challenge you on this because I hear this argument all the time from business leaders.
Okay, let's hear it.
If a school district or a massive vendor like Instructure is facing this kind of public humiliation and the impending release of millions of kids' behavioral and medical data, if the ransom demand is, say, $2 million, but the potential FTC fines are $50 million, doesn't their fiduciary duty dictate that they just pay the ransom? Doesn't paying make the problem go away?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, paying the ransom is perhaps the most dangerous self-destructive illusion in modern cybersecurity.
Strong words.
But true, it absolutely does not make the problem go away. It usually amplifies it. Let's look back at the PowerSchool incident. PowerSchool actually paid Matthew Lane's $2.9 million ransom demand in cryptocurrency.
They paid the teenager.
They paid him.
Yeah.
And in return, they received a video purportedly showing Lane deleting the database from his hard drive.
A video. Like a hostage proof of life video, but for data deletion. I'm sorry, but how do you verify that he didn't just copy the folder to a thumb drive before hitting delete for the camera?
You can't. And he almost certainly did, because what happened next? The data was clearly not destroyed. In the months following the payment, between December 24 and May 2025, multiple K-12 school districts across the country faced aggressive secondary extortion attempts from other threat actors wielding the exact same PowerSchool data.
Unbelievable.
Lane had likely already sold the database on a dark web forum or shared it with accomplices before he ever recorded that deletion video. There is no honor among thieves, and there's certainly no legal enforcement mechanism for a criminal contract.
You're paying millions of dollars for a pinky promise from a felon.
Exactly. And with a sophisticated group like ShinyHunters, paying is even more disastrous because successful extortion self-reinforces. If you pay them, you do not buy your security. You simply mark yourself as a lucrative, compliant target who is willing to fund their future research and development. In fact, if we look at the timeline, ShinyHunters actually breached Instructure's Salesforce environment in 2025, a full year before the Canvas breach. They compromised millions of records then.
And what did they do?
They came right back in 2026 for the main Canvas platform. Because once they map your environment, once they understand your internal architecture and your corporate incident response cadence, you are their best customer. Paying them just funds their next attack against you.
Okay, so the attackers are ruthless, they don't honor their deals, and the vendors' architectures are fundamentally flawed. So when the dust finally settles, when the servers are secured and the ransom deadlines inevitably pass, who actually takes the fall? Who gets in trouble with the government?
This is where the structural reality of the EdTech sector goes from merely complicated to truly absurd.
Because the shocking answer I found in these FTC guidelines is the victimized schools. The schools take the blame.
Yes, the entire global regulatory framework places the legal liability squarely on the regulated entity, which in this ecosystem is the educational institution.
So what does this all mean? Let me try another analogy to see if I have this legal framework straight.
Go for it.
Imagine you rent a storage unit to hold all your family's most precious heirlooms. You pay your monthly fee on time, but the massive corporate owner of the storage facility decides to cut corners and uses cheap, ungrounded wiring in the walls. The whole facility burns to the ground, your family's stuff is incinerated,
Okay.
and then the city fire inspector shows up, looks at the ashes, ignores the corporate owner, and writes you a massive fine for causing smoke damage to the neighborhood.
That is a brutally accurate analogy for how data processing agreements, or DPAs, work in education. Under almost every major regulatory framework, IPO, GDPR, COPPA, the software vendors like Instructure or PowerSchool act as processors. They merely process the data on behalf of a client. But the schools, the universities, the K-12 districts, they are considered the controllers of the data.
Because the school is the entity that originally collected the data from the student.
Correct. The school has the primary relationship with the citizen. Therefore, the legal burden to formally notify the students, to notify the parents, to set up call centers, to brief the media, and to answer to angry federal regulators falls almost entirely on the schools, not the vendors whose API actually failed.
And the timelines these schools are expected to hit are just mathematically brutal. Let's look at the compliance matrices from our friends over at compliancehub.wiki. If you are a teaching hospital or a university health system that uses Canvas for clinical training, and we know from the reports that massive institutions like Weill Cornell Medical College and the University of Nebraska Medical Center were swept up in this, you fall under HIPAA.
Yes, and HIPAA is strict.
The high pay breach notification rule is unforgiving. It requires you to notify affected individuals within exactly 60 days of the discovery of the breach. For the May 1st Canvas breach discovery, that absolute deadline was June 30th, 2026.
And if you have international students residing in the EU or you are an institution operating in Europe, the GDPR requires initial notification to supervisory authorities within 72 hours.
72 hours. That's barely enough time to form a crisis committee, let alone analyze terabytes of logs. But the biggest hammer here, the one keeping K-12 superintendents awake at night, is the updated COPA rule, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. This updated rule went into effect on April 22nd, 2026, literally 9 days before the Canvas exposure window opened.
The timing of that update is a regulatory nightmare for public school districts.
Under the new COPA rules, schools can no longer just post a vague banner on their website. They must notify parents directly, addressing them structurally as the rights holders of the data. And the enforcement teeth are razor sharp. The Federal Trade Commission can levy fines of up to $51,744 per violation.
Wow.
And crucially, precedent shows that can be interpreted on a per-child basis for systemic negligent failures.
Let's do that math out loud for a moment.
Yeah.
If you are the Los Angeles Unified School District or Chicago Public Schools, and you have hundreds of thousands of active and former students under the age of 13 whose behavioral profiles were exposed, a per-child penalty of $50,000 is not a number anyone wants to calculate. It is financially apocalyptic. It would bankrupt the public school system overnight.
Which brings me to the core tension here. I'm going to push back on this entire setup because it defies logic. How on earth can a local school district be expected to accurately notify parents within 30 or 60 days or face catastrophic bankrupting fines when the vendor instructor, in this case, publicly admits in their own press releases that it will take them weeks or months just to finish the e-discovery process and figure out exactly what was stolen?
You have identified the impossible, paradoxical position of every institutional general counsel right now. The forensic timeline, which is completely controlled by the vendor, is fundamentally misaligned with the regulatory timeline, which is strictly imposed on the school.
The clock is ticking, but the school is blindfolded.
Exactly. The moment instructor announces a breach, the school's 60-day regulatory clock starts ticking. But the school doesn't own the servers. They can't just send their own IT team into instructor's AWS data center to look at the traffic logs. They are entirely dependent on the vendor to provide what is called a tenant-specific scope letter.
Right.
That's a highly detailed document that says, here is exactly which of your specific students were affected, and here are the exact database columns that were taken.
And the vendors drag their feet.
It's not always malicious foot dragging, to be fair. Doing precise forensic e-discovery across 3.65 terabytes of unstructured text data, parsing it out accurately for 8,800 different institutions, takes an immense amount of time. It's looking for a needle in a digital haystack.
Sure, but
the federal law doesn't care how long the vendor takes. The FTC doesn't care about the vendor's haystack. This is why institutional counsel is having a collective panic attack. For years, schools believed that by buying a massive cloud-based platform like Canvas, they were outsourcing their security risk. They weren't. They outsourced the technical control, but they retained 100% of the legal liability.
And it all comes down to the fine print in the contracts, right? The DPAs.
The data processing agreements. Yes, most schools sign boilerplate DPAs provided by the vendor, and these templates have incredibly vague notification clauses. They will legally obligate the vendor to notify the school of a breach as soon as practicable, or without undue delay.
Which, from a legal standpoint, means absolutely nothing.
It is disastrously subjective. As soon as practicable for a global vendor dealing with a multinational crisis might be 3 months. But the school's specific state law might strictly require notification to parents within 30 days. So the school is forced into a terrible choice.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly. Do they issue vague, terrifying legal notices to their communities based on rumors and public news reports just to meet the deadline and avoid FTC fines? Or do they wait for the accurate forensic facts and risk regulatory wrath? Either way, it shatters the trust between the school and the community, while the vendor hides safely behind a vaguely worded contract.
This sounds incredibly bleak for the institutions. The system is just totally rigged against the controller. But I want to bring this down to the ground level for our audience. With the schools trapped in endless regulatory red tape and the vendors scrambling for months to patch their APIs and read their own logs, what can the listener do?
Right, the most important question.
If you are a parent dropping your kid off, a college student navigating finals, or a faculty member caught in the middle of this mess, What must you do immediately to protect your family?
This is the pivot point. We have to shift from systemic analysis to tactical individual survival. Because as we just established with the DPA timelines, official, accurate notification from your school is going to be delayed by weeks, if not months.
Yeah.
You cannot wait for the formal letter in the mail to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
You must assume your data is already exposed, already in the hands of brokers, and act defensively right now.
Right. Let's build the checklist. Step 1, and this is crucial regarding that Canvas unstructured narrative data we talked about. Treat any and all school-related email as highly suspicious, potentially hostile communication for at least the next 90 days.
The nature of phishing has fundamentally changed because of the weaponized intimacy of this breach.
It really has. Let me try to reframe the concept of stranger danger for 2026. When we were kids, the stranger was a guy in a trench coat lurking in a van at the edge of the playground. You knew what to look for. It was obvious.
Super obvious.
But today, the stranger is no longer in a van. The stranger is in your inbox. And they are wearing a hyper-realistic, data-driven digital mask of your child's actual math teacher. They aren't sending you a poorly spelled generic email about a Nigerian prince needing a wire transfer. They are sending you an email referencing the exact behavioral note you sent the teacher last Tuesday about your son's ADHD medication.
It will read perfectly. Hi, Mrs. Smith. Following up on our Canvas message about Tommy's accommodation request last week. The district requires a signature on the updated policy. Please click this secure portal link to review and sign his medical forms before Friday.
Exactly. It sounds flawless. It utilizes real, stolen context to manufacture urgency and trust. If you get an email with a link or a sense of urgency, even if it is from your real academic advisor about a real missed class, do not click the link in the email. Open a brand new browser window, manually type in the school's actual verified web address, log in directly to your dashboard, and check your notifications there.
That is the only way to verify intent. Assume the inbound link is a trap.
Step 2 on the checklist, freeze your minor child's credit at all 3 major bureaus: Equifax, Experian, TransUnion.
This is a direct, urgent response to the structured identity data exposed in the PowerSchool breach, but it applies universally to the modern threat landscape. Many parents simply do not realize that minor children have credit files that can be manipulated.
Right, because if they have a social security number, a file framework exists. It's just sitting there completely blank.
And as we discussed with synthetic identity fraud, that blank file is the holy grail for a criminal. Because parents inherently never check a 10-year-old's credit report, the fraud can run unchecked, compounding for a decade.
And as we mentioned, untangling a ruined credit history when your kid is trying to get their first student loan at 18 takes years of agonizing legal work.
But placing a security freeze on a minor's credit file takes about 30 minutes of your time. You have to submit some documentation to the 3 bureaus proving you are the legal guardian, but once it is in place, it locks the file down completely. The bureau will not allow any new credit accounts to be opened under that SSN until you manually unfreeze it with a PIN-N. It is the single highest ROI defensive action a parent can take today.
So be paranoid about emails, freeze the kid's credit. What else? Step 3, turn on 2FA two-factor authentication everywhere. But specifically, use an authenticator app like Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, or Authy. Do not rely on SMS text messages.
SMS text messages are vulnerable to SIM swapping attacks, where an attacker tricks your phone carrier into porting your phone number to their device. Then they get all your texts. An authenticator app generates the time-based code locally, offline, on your specific physical device. It is infinitely more secure. And pair that with a reputable password manager so you are never, ever reusing the same password across platforms.
And finally, demand specific structural answers in writing from your school district regarding data exposure and their notification timelines under COPA and FERPA. Do not let them brush you off with, "We are waiting on the vendor's report." Push them on the public record at school board meetings. And if an operative contacts you directly, claiming to have your college students' private Canvas messages or medical requests, and demands a cryptocurrency payment to keep it quiet, do not fall for the extortion bluff. Do not pay them.
The FBI has made it very clear in their advisories that opportunistic third-party scammers will simply use the public list of affected Ivy League schools and K-12 districts to mount blind extortion campaigns against people whose data wasn't even necessarily in the breached database. They will just mass email parents and bluff, hoping you panic and pay up out of fear. Never pay. Document the threat, take screenshots, report it immediately to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3, and contact your school's IT security department.
Before we zoom back out, I want to enthusiastically thank our final sponsor today, www.myprivacy.blog. Their incredibly clear, plain English parent and student survival guide heavily informed this entire tactical section of our deep dive. If you want step-by-step visual instructions on exactly how to navigate the credit bureaus to freeze your kids' credit, head over to myprivacy.blog right now.
It is incredibly empowering to move from feeling like a helpless victim of a supply chain collapse to taking concrete, proactive, protective action.
Okay, so we know how to patch our personal defenses. We freeze the credit, we lock down our inboxes, we use authenticator apps. But how do we stop the EdTech ecosystem from collapsing completely every 18 months? Let's take the macro view. How do we fix the structural plumbing?
We have to start by acknowledging, at a board of directors level, that the current standard methods for managing third-party vendor risk are completely obsolete.
Yeah, you see these software companies boasting about their annual compliance audits, the reliance on SOC 2 audits, annual security questionnaires, and basic cyber insurance policies. That is a failed 2015-era model. It feels like pure security theater.
It absolutely is security theater. A SOC 2 audit checks to see if a company has certain written policies in place. Do they conduct background checks? Do they have an incident response plan on paper? But an audit does not guarantee the architectural code-level soundness of a complex multi-tenant cloud application.
Obviously not.
A SOC 2 audit clearly didn't catch PowerSchool's un-MFA'd public support portal, and it clearly didn't catch Canvas's free-for-teacher lateral API movement vulnerability.
It's like checking if the guards are wearing uniforms, but not checking if the vault door is actually locked. So what has to change systemically?
The leverage point is procurement. When districts buy software, they have the power of the purse. Schools must renegotiate their data processing agreements, their DPAs, with real punitive teeth.
Meaning those vague, as soon as practical notification clauses have to be thrown in the garbage.
Exactly. Notification Service Level Agreements, or SLAs, must be contractually measured in hours, not days or weeks. The contract must mandate that the vendor provides preliminary tenant-specific scope within a strict time frame, say 72 hours, so the school can meet its regulatory obligations without guessing.
And what about the money, the indemnification? Because the school is holding the bag for the FTC fines.
This is critical. Right now, most boilerplate SaaS contracts cap the vendor's liability at the total amount the school paid for the software subscription over the last 12 months. So if a district pays $50,000 a year for Canvas, Instructure's liability in the event of a total breach is capped at exactly $50,000.
But responding to a breach of this massive size, providing 10 years of credit monitoring for students, hiring outside legal counsel, managing crisis communications, and paying FTC fines that costs a mid-sized district millions of dollars.
Which means the public schools are absorbing the massive financial shock of the private vendor's technical failure. Indemnification caps must be aggressively renegotiated to reflect realistic, holistic breach costs typically $2 to $5 million per incident, not just a measly refund of the annual software fee.
And we also need to talk about data hoarding. We need to mandate contractual data minimization. If a school isn't actively daily using a specific data field, like requiring a student's social security number in a system that doesn't strictly need it for federal financial aid processing, the vendor must be contractually obligated to automatically delete it.
Yes.
Not retain it indefinitely just because cloud storage is cheap. Less data stored means a smaller blast radius when the inevitable breach happens.
It's the most basic principle of security. You can't lose what you don't hold. But I know you have a fundamental question about this whole consolidation model.
I do. I want to challenge the core premise of EdTech consolidation here, because the entire argument pitched to school boards over the last decade was that these mega vendors, the power schools, the Instructures, the massive cloud providers, they have massive dedicated cybersecurity budgets. Millions of dollars, entire floors of elite security engineers.
Right, the economy of scale argument.
Exactly. A local public school district in Ohio could never afford that kind of elite security team. So, logically, shifting to the cloud should be safer. Why isn't that massive budget translating to better security? Why are they failing so spectacularly?
This raises an important question, and it points to the great paradox of cloud security. Yes, the mega vendor has a vastly larger security budget than the local school district's IT guy, but their attack surface is infinitely more complex.
Right. The local district only has to guard one small building with a few doors. The vendor is guarding a sprawling, interconnected global metropolis with millions of doors, windows, and ventilation shafts.
Exactly. And the nature of multi-tenant architecture means that a single, tiny oversight completely negates the entire massive security budget. Instructure can spend $20 million on advanced endpoint detection, dedicated threat hunting teams, AI anomaly detection, and encrypted backups. But if a single product manager decides to make the free-for-teacher onboarding process just a little bit smoother by relaxing one identity verification check on one API endpoint, and that free tier shares a database with the enterprise tier, all $20 million of security investment is instantly bypassed.
The attackers just walked around the million-dollar later grid because the side door was propped open with a brick for convenience.
Security is only as strong as the absolute weakest trust boundary in the entire system. In sector-wide consolidation, you aren't just pooling resources, you are intensely concentrating risk. And we have now seen, across the PowerSchool structural failure, the Canvas behavioral exposure, and the Ivy League vision campaigns, that the risk concentration has reached a critical, unsustainable mass.
It is a profoundly sobering reality. Let's recap what we've covered today. We started with the sheer massive scale of the May 2026 Canvas API breach and the December 2024 PowerSchool portal breach, roughly 350 million combined records exposing 41% of North American higher education and massive K-12 public districts.
We examined how those two breaches created a devastatingly synergistic combination of data for threat actors. The structured identity data from PowerSchool fueling long-term synthetic identity fraud, and the unstructured behavioral context from Canvas fueling hyper-authentic spear phishing and extortion.
We looked at the impossible regulatory burden placed on schools who are legally deemed the controllers of the data, forcing them to navigate strict federal IPA, GDPR, and COPA notification deadlines, while vendors entirely control the forensic timelines.
And most importantly, we outlined the immediate, tactical steps listeners must take right now, treating all school-related emails as highly suspicious, freezing minor children's blank credit files, enabling Authenticator App 2FA, and demanding contractual transparency from local school boards.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We started this deep dive talking about how our brains prefer disasters to be physical and visible. Like an X-ray showing a broken bone. It's clean, it's binary. But in a world where every academic struggle, every medical accommodation request, and every minor behavioral misstep of a child's life is digitized and then handed over to massive multi-tenant SaaS environments that sit completely outside of our local democratic control, does the concept of educational privacy even exist anymore? Or are we, as a society, just blindly haggling over the price of the inevitable leak?
It is a profound structural question, and one that every parent, educator, and lawmaker needs to be asking before we sign the next software contract.
Thank you so much for your insights and technical translations today, and thank you, the listener, for taking this expansive deep dive with us. Don't forget to check out the incredible vital work from our sponsors at www.myprivacy.blog, www.compliancehub.wiki, and www.breach.company. Stay safe out there, freeze that credit file right now, and we will catch you on the next one.